Hey everyone, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world, including this one, and all in one place. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. As you can hear, I'm getting over a little cold, so this might be a little rough, but I'm going to try my best. First, we talk about this day in history, and then we move on to our story of the day. Today we turn away from battles, revolutions, and ancient kingdoms, and instead dive into perhaps the most ambitious and quietly revolutionary experiment ever carried out on human life. And that is the study that began in 1938 at Harvard University, tracking hundreds of men over the course of decades, asking one simple question: what makes a good life? What makes us happy, long-term, through all the ups and downs? We then finish up with a history brief, where we highlight a section from author Mason Curry's 2019 book, Daily Rituals: How Artists Work. We're going to look at a daily ritual of the French thinker Voltaire. A quick word from our sponsors. This day in history. In 1808, on this date in Vienna, Symphony No. 5 and Symphony No. 6 by Ludwig van Beethoven saw their world premiere, a concert now one of classical music's most legendary. In 1894 on this day, the trial of Alfred Dreyfus reached a grim milestone when he was sentenced to life in prison for treason in France, a verdict steeped in anti-Semitism. That conviction sparked a worldwide scandal that would eventually reshape public discussion about justice, nationalism, and prejudice. Story of the day. In 1938, with the world teetering on the brink of World War II, a doctor at Harvard named Arlie Bach launched a project that would become quite legendary. The original participants were 268 Harvard sophomores, young, white male students entering adulthood just as the Great Depression's aftershocks still haunted many families. Among them was a young man named John F. Kennedy. The aim was simple. Rather than study disease or decline, as most medical research did at the time, Bach wanted to study successful, healthy lives. So over decades, the project expanded. It added new groups, including 456 inner-city youths from Boston, and eventually spouses and children of the original men. What began as a short-term experiment unfolded into nearly 9 decades of continuous observation, now known as the Harvard Study of Adult Development. Researchers have collected an extraordinary variety of data: physical exams, blood tests, interviews, psychological assessments, brain scans, even recordings of personal stories that followed participants through college, marriage, work, war, parenthood, crisis, and aging, life in all of its complexity. From the mountain of data, patterns started to emerge, and what they reveal isn't always what we expect. After decades of research, scientists distilled several enduring truths. Here are the ones that I think stand out. Relationships, not wealth or status, predict happiness and longevity. The most consistent lesson? Close relationships. Family, friends, community. Those matter more than wealth, intelligence, or fame. People who reported strong, warm, stable relationships at the age of 50 were the healthiest and happiest at the age of 80. In fact, relational quality often predicted physical health more reliably than any major biomarkers, like cholesterol, for example. Those with happy marriages or deep friendships had lower rates of heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, and much slower cognitive decline. As the study's current director, Robert J. Waldinger, puts it bluntly, good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. The inverse is just as powerful, however. Loneliness kills, and social connection protects. Loneliness, chronic isolation, weak social ties, is as harmful to long-term health and well-being as smoking or alcoholism. People who lacked meaningful connections tended to suffer more illness, greater mental decline, and much shorter lifespans, according to this decades-long study. The finding resonates strongly today, as many societies grapple with isolation, digital alienation, and the erosion of traditional community bonds. Another finding is that happiness is not a young person's game. Many participants became happier as they grew older. Past middle age, life tends to shift. The Harvard men gradually started focusing less on wealth or achievement and much more on emotional richness. They grew better at letting go of petty grievances, savoring small moments, and valuing relationships above ambition. In effect, as they sensed that their time was limited, many reevaluated what mattered. For many, the good life became less about external measures of success and much more about internal connection, meaning, and emotional resilience. Another finding was the fact that emotional intelligence and adaptation matters. The study highlights how emotional responses really shape life trajectories. Researchers found that men who developed mature coping strategies, empathy, self-awareness, acceptance, tended to handle life's challenges much better, building more stable relationships and staying healthier longer. These are not fixed traits by any means. Over decades, many of the men shifted from immature or even neurotic patterns, such as denial, projection, withdrawal, toward healthier, mature responses. This capacity for growth and adaptation, emotional intelligence, became a key factor in long-term well-being. But let us get back to the actual study. One of the most powerful aspects of this Harvard study is its scale, but even more, its humanity. These are real lives, filled with triumphs, setbacks, regrets, and redemption. Some men, like the young Harvard student with promising intellect, went on to careers, marriage, and achievement, but then struggled with addiction, personal crises, or mental illness. Others, children of neglect, poor backgrounds, or early hardship, found purpose later in life. One such man, previously isolated and depressed, described a kind of personal awakening in middle age that transformed his outlook, relationships, and mental health. These stories remind us that early advantage doesn't guarantee a smooth ride. Adversity doesn't doom you. What matters most, at least from this study, seems to be how you respond, learn, and adapt, and whether you stay connected to others, of course. What actionable lessons can we draw from nearly a century of human lives studied under the microscope of science and memory? Well, there are a few. Invest in relationships, not just for now, but for decades. Reaching out to friends, maintaining closeness with family, nurturing community bonds, these are not optional extras. They may be the single most important investment you make for long-term happiness and health. Then there is quality over quantity. It's not about having dozens of acquaintances, it's about having a few people that you trust deeply. This study shows depth of connection matters much more. There's also emotional intelligence that counts. How you navigate life's storm with empathy, maturity, self-awareness. These can profoundly shape your long-term trajectory. And then focus on what matters. As life progresses, meaning and relationships often offer more fulfillment than money, status, or possessions. And the last thing it teaches us is that it's never too late. The study shows that people changed, grew, reconnected, even in middle age or beyond. Needless to say, while this is kind of an interesting history because it's also psychological, I think that this scientific study, started at a college campus in 1938, definitely continues to resonate today. Because the Harvard study, just like history itself, I feel like reminds us that beneath the noise, there's human connection, emotional resilience, shared history, support, and trust. The History Brief. Today we embark on a series that I hope to highlight here more often, and that is daily rituals of historical personalities. How did people that we read about in our history books live their everyday lives? Today, Voltaire. This section comes from Mason Curry's book, Daily Rituals. The French Enlightenment writer and philosopher liked to work in bed, particularly in his later years. A visitor recorded Voltaire's routine in 1774. He spent the morning in bed, reading and dictating new work to one of his secretaries. At noon, he rose and got dressed. Then he would receive visitors, or if there were none, continued to work, taking coffee and chocolate for sustenance. Between 2 and 4 p.m., Voltaire and his principal secretary, Jean-Louis, went out in a carriage to survey the estate. Then he worked again until 8 p.m. when he would join his widowed niece and longtime lover, Madame de Nice, and others for supper. But his working day did not end there. Voltaire often continued to give dictation after supper, continuing deep into the night. His secretary estimated that, all told, they worked 18 to 20 hours a day. For Voltaire, it was a perfect arrangement. "I love the cell," he wrote. Thank you so much for tuning in once more to listen to this humble little podcast. I really appreciate all of your support. If you have any questions, comments, you can always reach me at peter@historyshortspodcast.com or visit www.historyshortspodcast.com or look for History Shorts Podcast on X, Facebook, and Patreon. Again, I apologize for the cold, but we somehow got through it. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow.